Where are we today, Bill?
Well, Rick, we are in the city of Portsmouth, and we are in South Cemetery, which, in my estimation, is probably one of the prettiest cemeteries in the state of New Hampshire. Today, it's early spring, isn't quite spring in March, and of course we're in stick season. There's no snow, but in the fall, this place lights up, and in the summer
it's
too.
Gorgeous,
It's just absolutely gorgeous, and it's very much like a park. And we've already run into a couple of joggers this morning, and
Yep.
the cemetery actually dates back to 1721, when a William Cotton was given a portion of land he cleared it for cattle grazing, and it was also to be used for a training ground for the militias. And at some point, William put in a family cemetery, and from that, the Cotton Cemetery, the rest of South Cemetery grew. And the cemetery actually is divided into 5 separate cemeteries. There's Cotton, there's Elmwood, Harmony Grove, and Proprietor's Bury Ground, and Sagamore. And at one point, a portion of it was called Auburn, and that's because the street over here was called Auburn at that day.
Yeah,
but the street's been renamed, so that's not the case anymore. There's so many famous people in Portsmouth and from around Portsmouth that are buried in here. And we're going to film 2 today, I believe.
That's right, yeah.
And then we'll be coming back because there are a lot more people here that we're going to cover, and we're covered in our books, Buried in New Hampshire.
Yep.
So
which is coming out pretty soon.
Yes, we're about a month away, I think from
so.
Publication. Well, today we're going to cover it's a very tragic story, and that is the story of Ruth Blay. And Rick is the expert on Ruth, and he wrote the piece, so we're going to let Rick take care of that.
Well, Ruth Blay is a very sad story.
Yes.
And she is buried down here we believe, on the other side of that pond.
Yeah.
And actually, I think in a few moments, before we really talk about Ruth, we're going to go down there.
Yes.
And the road that she unfortunately was hung, and she was the last woman to be hanged in New Hampshire.
Yes.
She was not the first, however.
No.
And we're not going to get into the others. And her grave is unmarked.
Yes.
There's no way right now to know exactly where she is. But we just went by that, and I don't know how you felt, but when I looked down that road, it just brought it alive to me somehow.
Yes.
I mean, it's one thing to say it's down there, which, we have a shot in our book from probably a little further up here, but looks down on this little pond, and it's gorgeous.
Yes.
But this is a sad story, and when you get down to the other side where that road is, it just makes it more real.
Yeah.
So let's head down there.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and I'll tell you the rest of the story. So we've come down now to the general area where she was hung, and we think probably buried over there somewhere where the flag is.
Where the flag is near the pond.
Near the pond is the information we have. Potentially, perhaps, the gallows might have been up here a little to our left in what was Bill described as the Cotton Cemetery. Hard to tell. When I got here, though, I was trying to just imagine what this looked like.
Yes.
And, with a gallows, with people gathered around, which they were, to watch this, and where it all quite sat, because it really is quite a story. I mean, this was 1768.
Oh, yes.
And she was a 31-year-old former school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth was. And she was the 3rd woman, apparently, in this area, convicted of concealment of an infant. And that was an hangable offense at that point.
Yes.
Now, you might ask, what does that mean? Well, it meant that actually she was pregnant. she was not married, and that she had a baby out of wedlock, which at that time was considered very much of a I guess, a sin, really.
And a hangable sin at that.
And what she did do is she hid the baby.
Yes.
The story goes a little further than that because it appears that the baby was stillborn.
Yes.
So it wasn't as if she had a young baby that she needed to somehow care for. She realized it was stillborn. I'm projecting a little, but she's, well, okay, I don't want to be hung. I don't want to be accused. So what's the best way to deal with this is to what they called conceal it.
Yes.
And unfortunately, about 3 days later, some kids, and some of them were actually kids that she'd hadn't taught at one point, they discovered the body in an old barn. Apparently she had, at least the story I saw, she had lifted some boards and put it underneath, and they had found it. Well, Attorney General Claggett at that time justified the conviction. This is what he said. He called heaven to witness that he was discharging a duty that he owed his country, his king, and his God. High Sheriff Thomas Parker apparently felt like he was doing the same thing. Now, Sheriff Parker, Sheriff Packer had actually been involved with quite a few hangings, and apparently it was a part of his job to be there and be responsible for a hanging. Now, Governor John Wentworth was the governor at that time, so he had originally ordered the execution to be November 24th, 1768. This actually, when this really happened, was December 30th. So there had been previous reprieves where they had postponed the hanging. And she was supposed to die or be hung on December 30th, as I said, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Well, Sheriff Parker was here. He was in charge at that point. There were people waiting, wondering whether there'd be another reprieve. Mm. So what happened is, this is the story, at least, that Sheriff Parker was hungry and wanted to go home for lunch. And because of that, what he did is the story varies. He probably did hang her between 10 and 2. But what he did not do was wait to see if there was a reprieve. Well, Ruth obviously denied murdering her baby, and it does appear from all accounts that she was stillborn. The legend was what I just told you, that he didn't wait for the pardon. Whether there was a pardon or not is not clear. Whether someone, I think in the poem that was written, I'm going to read a little small part of that, but in some accounts you find, that somebody came with the pardon or the reprieve. It wasn't a pardon, but a reprieve right at the moment after she died. On the other hand, the story tells that she was left to hang, and the depiction I've heard is that he got in his carriage and then drove off while she was hanging there, and she did not die immediately.
Yeah. Well, I believe they did use the short drop. She was dropped off a cart.
Yeah,
it wasn't a gallows.
Right. That's right.
But she was set on a cart and dropped off.
So anyway, there is a ballad of Ruth Blay by this Albert Leighton, and that supports the legend, and is very well possibly the the source of a lot of the information we have for that legend, because trying to find actual text that tells you exactly what happened is not that easy. She was judged by men in those days, so in a way you could say it wasn't really her peers exactly. Of course, you also have to understand or wonder about which one of these men, what were their motives? Were they just doing their duty? Was one of them possibly the father? We don't know. But at the beliefs of that time in 1768, apparently they did not question the morality of what they're doing.
Yes.
25 years later, concealment was no longer punishable.
Yes.
Betsy Pettingill was one of the schoolgirls who found it.
Yes.
And she said, this has kind of become the saying that goes with Ruth Blay, is that she was more sinned against than sinning.
Yes.
Which is, I think, certainly true.
Kind of sums it up.
Yes. Now, there is a, I don't know what you call it, a mural.
Yes.
In Portsmouth, remembering Ruth Blay. There's a Facebook page, basically a group of people who are remembering and keeping her memory alive. One of those things, again, we've run into more than once is the morality of that time as opposed to the morality of our times. But certainly Ruth Blay was an unfortunate victim of a time when women did not have many rights.
No, certainly had no voice.
And had no voice. And basically having a baby out of wedlock was definitely frowned upon and considered a hangable offense. Unbelievable for us to believe in this day and age, but apparently it was true. This is from the Ballad of Ruth Blay by Albert Leighton. And a voice among them shouted, "Pause before the deed is done. We have asked reprieve and pardon for the poor misguided one. But these words of Sheriff Packer rang above the swelling noise. Must I wait and lose my dinner? Draw away the cart, boys."
He certainly ended up being the villain of the story.
I think he did.
Yes, although we've found later that he was definitely a patriot and lived a long time after into the Revolution.
That's right.
And he's buried in North Cemetery, which
yeah.
we've covered in an earlier video, and we have unfortunately never found.
No, we may run across him, but very sad story.
Yes.
In a beautiful setting.
Yes.
And I sit here and try to imagine it, and it sends a chill up my spine.
Absolutely.
So Ruth, wherever you are back there, rest in peace.
Yeah.